The desert was quiet before the storm. Morning light crept over the ridges of Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia, turning sand and stone into molten gold. The air shimmered. Dust hung in the windless calm. Somewhere beyond that rocky plain, the first clash between American and German ground forces in North Africa was about to begin. Behind a cracked wall, a young German soldier adjusted his helmet and peered through the scope of his rifle. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Schmidt, 24 years old, veteran of Poland, France and the Russian front, had seen battle before, but today something would feel different. His hands knew the rhythm of war: load, aim, fire, cycle the bolt, eject and reload. The Karabiner 98K, his trusted companion, had never failed him. The rifle was precise, rugged, elegant in its simplicity. 5 rounds sat in the magazine, each one a 7.92 by 57mm cartridge, capable of cutting through cover and armour alike. Schmidt had learned to fire 15 aimed shots per minute, 15 precise chances to survive. He had been told the enemy approaching over the dunes was inexperienced, untested, armed with inferior weapons. Yet when the Americans appeared, advancing in a long skirmish line, the illusion of German superiority began to crumble. The first volley came not as a series of cracks, but as a relentless roar. Sharp, continuous, almost mechanical. No pause for bolts to cycle, no rhythm of reloads, just an unending stream of shots that tore through the air like the rattle of distant thunder. Schmidt hesitated. He managed to fire 3 rounds before diving for cover. By the time he chambered a 4th, the American opposite him had already emptied his rifle, reloaded, and was firing again. That sound, impossible to ignore, impossible to match, was the voice of a weapon the world had never truly faced before. The M1 Garand, the first standard-issue semi-automatic rifle of the modern age. In that instant, decades of German infantry doctrine built on precision and discipline collided head-on with a new philosophy of warfare, one defined by speed, volume and adaptability. The bolt-action age was dying, and Schmidt was hearing its funeral in real time. To understand why this moment mattered, we must step back, into the heart of German confidence, forged in the traditions of the Prussian military machine. For generations, German doctrine worshipped accuracy and control. Each soldier was a marksman, each shot deliberate. The Karabiner 98K, adopted in 1935, was the crowning expression of that faith. Reliable in mud, snow, or sand, simple to maintain, and lethal at ranges beyond 500 yards. It embodied the belief that war was won by discipline, not speed. And for a time, that belief seemed justified. The 98K carried German soldiers from Warsaw to Paris, to the gates of Moscow. Against opponents armed with similar bolt-action rifles, it was more than enough. But across the Atlantic, a very different idea was taking shape, born not in battlefields, but in the mind of a quiet Canadian engineer working at Springfield Armory. His name was John Cantius Garand. Garand had spent years perfecting a weapon that would change everything. A self-loading rifle that could fire 8 powerful .30-06 cartridges as fast as a soldier could pull the trigger. No bolts, no pauses, no wasted motion. When one clip was empty, it ejected automatically with a distinctive metallic ping, a sound that would soon echo from North Africa to Normandy. The United States Army officially adopted his design on January 9, 1936, calling it simply the US Rifle, caliber .30 M1. At first, progress was slow. American generals were skeptical. A self-loading rifle seemed too complex, too heavy, too expensive. Yet as the world edged closer to war, the pace quickened. By 1941, the production lines at Springfield Armory were running at full speed, turning out hundreds of rifles per day. When Japanese forces struck Pearl Harbor and invaded the Philippines in December 1941, the M1 Garand was no longer a prototype, it was a reality. American troops used it immediately in the desperate battles of Bataan and Corregidor. Japanese soldiers, unaccustomed to the volume of fire, often believed they faced machine guns rather than rifles. By the time American forces landed in North Africa in late 1942, their weapon had already been tested in the crucible of war. The Germans, however, didn't know that yet. Their intelligence reports dismissed the Garand as a curiosity, a heavy, semi-automatic rifle of little consequence. The analysts argued that it might fire faster, but at the cost of accuracy and reliability. They saw no reason to worry. They were wrong. When the first firefights erupted around Sidi Bouzid, German troops expecting to dominate with precision marksmanship found themselves pinned down by sheer volume. The mathematics were brutal. In the time a German soldier could fire 30 careful shots from his Kar 98K, an American with a Garand could unleash 80. And every one of those 80 rounds was aimed. The result was not just tactical, it was psychological. German soldiers trained to believe in their superiority suddenly found themselves outgunned by men they had been told were soft, clumsy, and undisciplined. Every burst of semi-automatic fire chipped away at that illusion. The Garand's design gave American riflemen an unmatched advantage. Its gas-operated system harnessed a portion of the propellant gases from each shot to cycle the action automatically, ejecting the spent casing and loading the next round in a fraction of a second. The rifle stayed on target between shots, allowing the shooter to maintain his sight picture. Accuracy didn't diminish. It improved. Tests at Springfield Armory showed the M1 could group shots within 4 inches at 100 yards, rivaling or exceeding most bolt-action rifles. And in combat, that translated into lethality. For the first time in history, an entire army marched to war with semi-automatic rifles as standard issue. The effect rippled across every battlefield. American infantry squads could generate a curtain of accurate rifle fire without relying solely on machine guns. Each soldier became a miniature fire team, capable of suppressing enemies, maneuvering under cover, and seizing initiative. German doctrine, which centered on machine gun dominance supported by riflemen, was suddenly outdated. The MG-34 and MG-42 were still fearsome weapons, but they could no longer compensate for the disparity in individual firepower. The Americans didn't just outshoot the Germans, they outnumbered them in bullets per second. By early 1943, German officers were sending back grim reports from Tunisia and Sicily. American rifle fire was too fast, too relentless, too precise. "We cannot lift our heads without being hit," one captured document noted. "They fire as if every man carries a machine gun." The German response was predictable. Build their own semi-automatic rifles. Engineers at Mauser and Walther produced the G41, a complex muzzle gas-operated design that avoided drilling into the barrel, a decision born of bureaucratic paranoia rather than practicality. The result was a heavy, unreliable weapon that fouled easily and performed poorly in the field. After studying captured Soviet SVT-40 rifles, German designers finally accepted what they had once rejected. The gas port system worked. The improved G43 rifle appeared in 1943 with a detachable 10-round magazine and a simpler operating system. It was a step forward, but too small, too late. Only about 40,000 G43s were built by war's end, a fraction of the millions of bolt-action rifles still in service. For every German soldier carrying a G43-50 carried a Kar 98K. Meanwhile, American factories were operating on a different scale entirely. Between 1937 and 1945, Springfield Armory produced over 3.5 million Garands, and Winchester contributed another 500,000. By the time Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in June 1944, nearly every US infantryman carried one. This industrial miracle turned a technological advantage into a strategic weapon. It wasn't just about better guns, it was about everyone having one. The Garand was no delicate machine. It thrived in desert sand, European mud, and Pacific humidity. Soldiers praised its reliability, its balance, and its speed. Field stripping required no tools, cleaning could be done in minutes. It was the kind of weapon a soldier could trust when everything else was falling apart. And in war, trust meant survival. Back in Europe, German units learned this lesson the hard way. During the brutal Italian campaign of 1943 and 1944, from the beaches of Salerno to the mountains near Cassino, the pattern repeated. German positions that should have held firm were overwhelmed not by artillery or tanks, but by infantry fire. After-action reports from captured German divisions described American rifle fire as unceasing and unnerving. Entire squads were pinned down by soldiers firing from the hip with uncanny accuracy. German commanders began requesting more machine guns to compensate, but supply lines were stretched, and replacements never kept pace. By mid-1944, the German army faced an uncomfortable truth. Its soldiers, though experienced and disciplined, were losing firefights not because of training or courage, but because of mathematics. Each time a German soldier lifted his head to aim, Half a dozen Garand rounds were already on their way. Technology had tipped the scales. By the time Allied forces landed in Normandy, the sound of the M1 Garand had become the anthem of an army. When those landing craft dropped their ramps on the morning of June 6, 1944, a storm of rifle fire rolled ashore with the men. The 352nd Infantry Division, elite, well-positioned and dug in, faced an enemy unlike any they had fought before. German soldiers had spent years perfecting the art of defensive warfare, overlapping fields of fire, interlocking machine gun nests, precise coordination between riflemen and gunners. It had worked everywhere from the Eastern Front to the hills of Italy. But Omaha Beach was different. Every American who stepped onto that sand carried a rifle capable of rapid, aimed fire. There were no pauses to cycle bolts, no rhythm for German gunners to exploit. Each time a machine gun crew exposed itself, dozens of Garands turned toward them. 8 shots, reload, 8 more. German officers later wrote that the incoming fire was so constant that defenders struggled to reload their own weapons. Machine gun crews were eliminated in seconds. In the chaos of that morning, the myth of German small-arm superiority died quietly on the cliffs above Omaha. The Garand had transformed not just the pace of combat, but its psychology. American riflemen, knowing their weapon could answer instantly, fought aggressively, using suppressive fire to move, flank and close on enemy positions. It was no longer about who aimed better, it was about who could maintain momentum, and the M1 Garand gave that momentum to every soldier who carried it. As Allied forces pushed inland through the bocage of Normandy, the weapon's value became undeniable. The hedgerow fighting was close, violent, and chaotic. Visibility was often less than 50 yards. In that environment, the ability to fire rapidly, accurately, and without mechanical interruption decided who lived and who died. German infantry units, even those composed of veterans, found themselves trapped in defensive patterns that no longer worked. Their tactical doctrine, fire, reposition, fire again, collapsed under the weight of relentless American return fire. The Kar-98K, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, had become a relic overnight. The German High Command knew it. In desperate response, engineers accelerated work on what would become one of the most influential firearms ever built, the Sturmgewehr 44, or St. G44, the first true assault rifle. Firing an intermediate 7.92 by 33mm Kurz cartridge, the StG-44 combined the controllable recoil of a carbine with the firepower of a light machine gun. It could fire in semi-automatic or fully automatic mode, fed from a 30-round magazine. On paper, it was revolutionary. In practice, it was too little, too late. Production began in earnest in 1944, but by then Germany's industrial base was collapsing under relentless Allied bombing. Fuel, steel, and transport were in short supply. Ammunition stockpiles dwindled. Only about 400,000 StG-44s were ever produced. Impressive in design, insignificant in effect. Most German soldiers never saw one. Those who did often lacked ammunition or spare parts. In contrast, by late 1944, the United States had achieved something no other nation in history had done. An entire military force, millions of men, equipped with semi-automatic rifles as standard issue. This wasn't just an engineering triumph. It was an industrial and logistical miracle. The American system had proven capable not only of inventing superior technology, but of mass-producing it on a scale the world had never seen. General George S. Patton, a man not known for understatement, called the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised. He understood what it meant. The rifle embodied the American way of war, relentless, adaptable, and fueled by innovation. In countless engagements across Europe, the pattern was the same. When American riflemen opened fire, German units broke contact. They couldn't match the intensity. Even well-trained snipers, relying on the precision of their bolt-action rifles, struggled to survive under a storm of semi-automatic fire. The Garand had turned every soldier into a potential marksman capable of sustained suppression. German after-action reports from the Italian and French campaigns make for sobering reading. One captured document from the 94th Infantry Division described how American rifle fire creates the impression of multiple machine guns. Another lamented that it is nearly impossible to return aimed fire without attracting immediate hits. These weren't excuses, they were acknowledgements of defeat at the most intimate level of war, the firefight between individuals. The numbers tell the story. A skilled German soldier might fire 15 aimed rounds per minute. An American, without losing sight alignment, could double or even triple that rate. In 2 minutes, a single American rifleman could fire 80 rounds. Multiply that by an entire squad, and the result was devastating. Even when outnumbered, American infantry could dominate through volume and accuracy alone. And yet, the brilliance of the M1 Garand wasn't only mechanical, it was philosophical. It represented a belief that technology could equalize the battlefield, that giving every soldier the best possible weapon was not extravagance, but necessity. Germany's failure to embrace that philosophy early enough was one of its great strategic blind spots. The Wehrmacht had placed its faith in tradition, discipline, training, and precision. But as Schmidt and his comrades learned in the deserts of Tunisia, tradition doesn't stop bullets. The Garand changed how wars would be fought forever. After 1945, every major military power re-evaluated its approach to infantry arms. The Soviet Union, having studied both the Garand and the St. G44, merged the two concepts, semi-automatic reliability and intermediate caliber firepower, into the design of the AK-47. The United States would later evolve the Garand's lineage into the M14, and from there, the M16. Every rifle that followed carried a trace of John Garand's genius. The weapon also redefined tactics. Before the M1, infantry movement relied on machine guns for covering fire. After the M1, every man could provide his own. Fire and maneuver, once the privilege of elite units, became the standard doctrine of the US Army. The Garand didn't just increase firepower, it democratized it. In the closing months of the war, as American forces crossed the Rhine and pushed into Germany, even hardened Wehrmacht veterans admitted their shock. Some spoke of how the Americans shot like machines, others of how the rifle never stopped. These were not exaggerations, they were eyewitness accounts of a paradigm shift. At the tactical level, the Garand saved lives, countless lives. In firefights where seconds decided everything, not having to work a bolt meant surviving another minute, another attack, another day. At the strategic level, it symbolized something larger, that technology and production, when guided by clear vision, can overpower even the most experienced enemy. After the war, when historians and military analysts studied casualty reports and battle data, they noticed a pattern. American infantry units consistently inflicted higher ratios of casualties compared to what doctrine predicted. The reasons were complex. Superior logistics, artillery, and air support all played roles. But one factor stood out in every analysis: the rifle each man carried. The M1 Garand wasn't perfect. It was heavy at 9.5 pounds, and its 8-round clip seemed small compared to later designs. But it was reliable, accurate, and devastatingly fast. It did what mattered most: it fired when needed. Even after the war ended, its legacy endured. The Garand served through Korea and even into the early years of Vietnam before the M14 officially replaced it in 1957. Yet National Guard units and Allied nations continued to use it well into the 1970s. The sound of its clip ejecting, a sharp metallic ping, became one of the most recognizable echoes of the 20th century. Soldiers swore you could hear it even in dreams. Decades later, veterans would still speak of it with reverence. To them, the Garand wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of trust, a piece of steel that never gave up when everything else seemed to. And for the men who faced it, like Schmidt and countless others, the memory of that sound carried a different weight. It was the sound of an enemy they could not outshoot, the sound of inevitability. As German officers analysed their defeats after the war, many identified the same conclusion. They had entered World War II with a rifle that was the pinnacle of the old world, and they lost it to a rifle that defined the new. In the words of one former Panzer Army commander, the American infantryman, armed with his self-loading rifle, possessed firepower greater than ours, even when we held superior ground. It wasn't just a reflection on weapons, it was a reflection on adaptation. The Garand proved that technology in the hands of disciplined soldiers can redefine the battlefield faster than doctrine can evolve. The lessons it taught continue to echo in modern warfare. Firepower, mobility, and reliability are the triad of survival. The nation that equips its soldiers best doesn't just win battles, it shapes history. When the dust of war finally settled over Europe, the Kar-98K and the M1 Garand stood as symbols of two philosophies. One rooted in precision and heritage, the other in innovation and audacity. Both rifles were masterpieces of their time, but only one belonged to the future. The M1 Garand had done more than give American soldiers an advantage. It had proven a truth that no army could ignore, that the weapon in a soldier's hands can alter the balance of power across continents. Its influence is carved into every rifle that followed, from the jungles of Vietnam to the deserts of the Middle East. Each semi-automatic burst, each smooth reload, is a distant echo of that moment in Tunisia, when Wilhelm Schmidt raised his bolt-action rifle and realized that history had moved on without him. In that desert silence, under a sun burning over two armies meeting for the first time, the old rhythm of war ended. The new rhythm began with a single sound: ping.